This is Talk to the Left, and I'm your host, Jason Rigden. On this episode of the show, I'm here with Collin Jergens of Fuse Washington. How are you today?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh yeah, thank you so much for coming on the show. So could you tell me a little bit about the problems that Fuse is trying to help with?
Well, Fuse was founded in 2007 because a lot of people looked at Washington state as a blue state, as a democratic state with a strong progressive bent, but they didn't see policy wins keeping up with people's perception of the state. And at the time, we had pretty big majorities in our state legislature, but we just weren't seeing legislation move through to align with our values. So Fuse was founded to elect stronger progressive majorities and then push those elected officials to pass bolder reforms, whether it's protecting our environment, ensuring healthcare access for all, reforming our state's tax code, ensuring that workers can earn a good wage at a safe workplace, and any number of other things.
And so how is Fuse trying to solve those problems?
So right now, we are very focused on the midterm election. It's coming up very soon, and we are trying to elect as many progressives up and down the ballot here in Washington state. We have a unique opportunity this year in Washington to flip potentially 3 U.S. House seats and really send a strong message to Washington that we are looking for change, and we're looking for a new generation of leaders who better reflect our communities and will fight to protect our home here in Washington.
And you coordinate with a lot of other organizations, is that correct?
Yes. We work closely with many other progressive advocates in Washington, whether it's Washington Conservation Voters or Planned Parenthood or labor unions or immigrant rights groups. Our name, Fuse, is not an acronym. It actually refers to bringing people together. One of the reasons that many people thought back in 2007 that we were not seeing the type of progressive policy wins that we wanted was that too often progressive advocates were not working together enough. That even very well-meaning people were working hard, but were too siloed. And so part of our founding goal was to get progressive advocates and volunteers to coordinate more closely so that we are all pushing towards one goal rather than fighting alone.
Yeah, it seems like a continuous problem for progressives is oftentimes we're more divided than we really should be. We need that force to kind of help bring us together under a bigger umbrella.
Yes, we haven't solved the problem entirely yet, but I think there have been some improvements, particularly here at the state level, that the folks on the policy side and advocates down in Olympia are more coordinated than they have been in the past. And certainly the Trump administration and resisting the Trump administration has been a unifying theme for people on the left, across the left.
And you have quite a large mailing list to reach people.
We do. So Fuse has an email list of a little bit more than 100,000 progressive activists across the state. We also have a large following on social media. That allows us to get our messages out and keep people informed on the left about important issues and important elections that are happening. We also have a large grassroots base around the state. When I started at Fuse back in 2010, I think we had a staff of 6 or 7, and we've grown to a staff of about 30 now, actually leading up to the elections. We have staff and strong volunteer councils in Spokane, in East King County, in Tacoma, and in South King County, along with folks on the ground working in congressional districts that are top priorities for us in Wenatchee and Ellensburg and Walla Walla. So we truly are a statewide organization, both in our membership and our staff. And we are working really hard here leading up to the election, trying to remake our congressional delegation and bring change to Washington, D.C.
So what have been some of the biggest challenges this organization has faced?
That's a good question. I think the last 2 years have been tough for everyone on the left. I think just psychologically and emotionally staying positive and continuing to fight even on the days when it seems like things are really going off track in our country. Uh, but it's also been really inspiring in the last couple of years to see the energy and the motivation among the grassroots. People who've never been involved in politics before are suddenly showing up and saying, how can I help? How can I protect my community? How can I fight for a better future for my kids? And I think you saw that at the Women's March. You saw that at the marches for climate, on tax day. And it's really been remarkable to see, just people come out and fight for their communities. In Spokane, in 2016, we were building up our local volunteer council. And on a good day, we would get 20 or 30 people out to a local organizing meeting. And the first meeting that we had after Inauguration Day in 2017, we had more than 600 people. It was a very cold January day in Spokane. There was snow on the ground, and we had more people than we could fit in the large hall that we had rented. And so people actually were standing outside in the snow with their friends and neighbors talking about how they could organize and come together to protect their communities.
Yeah, it's fantastic. I don't think people maybe outside the state realize that Eastern Washington is quite a conservative Republican kind of fairly dominated area. I've seen you guys have done a lot of work trying to network out there.
Yes, the eastern side of the state is typically Republican, but there are definitely some pockets of progressive activists. And Spokane is actually our largest volunteer base in the whole state. We have a very engaged group of people who have been out there, like I said, in the snow. We've had people out on the streets on 95-degree days. Even in the midst of the smoke this last August, people were out protesting and holding signs and making their voice heard. So it has been really inspiring to see people who have never been involved in politics before, especially in areas that are not Seattle, areas that are not typically blue. We've had people out, at rallies and holding public events in Wenatchee and in Ellensburg and in Walla Walla and in Pullman and in Spokane. And that takes an extra level of courage when many of your neighbors may not agree with you politically, but they're still willing to go out and make their voice heard and fight for what they believe in.
There's been a bit of talk about how Seattle is becoming a more conservative city. Do you see that at all?
I haven't really seen that. I think that Seattle is still very progressive, and Seattle is really an innovation engine for the region. You look at what Seattle has done on raising the minimum wage, on passing paid sick leave, on pushing the envelope on what can be done around climate change, on ensuring that workers can have predictable schedules and are not waking up each morning to wondering if they're going to be able to go to work. There's a lot of things that Seattle is doing to push the envelope. And then you'll see other cities, other counties, and the state follow suit a few years later. So, no, I don't think Seattle's becoming more conservative. As someone who lives in Seattle, it's clear that we have a real crisis around homelessness and affordable housing. And a lot of people are frustrated about that, even very progressive folks like me. And so we are, it's clear that our city and our region needs to take bold action on that. As we grow, there's so much prosperity in this region. And I think there is frustration that in an area with so much wealth, that so many of our neighbors are sleeping on the streets every night.
So right now we're very, very close to the midterm election. But what are some of the plans that Fuse has for the future going forward after the election?
Well, it's very busy right now with the election, but we are starting to make some plans for the next state legislative session. We are hoping that Democrats will retake the U.S. House of Representatives in Congress and maybe even the Senate. But with Trump as president for the next 2 years, it's going to be hard to make significant advances policy-wise. So we're really looking at our state legislature, as well as cities and counties in Washington, to be a place where we lead on passing bold progressive reforms. if everything goes well on election day, we should have much larger progressive majorities in Olympia. And we're looking at a variety of policies that we can pass, some of which are tied to housing affordability and addressing homelessness, as in addition to continue to do more on climate change and healthcare access for all.
Unfortunately, there's so much focus going to Congress. People often forget these more local elections, even at the state level or county or even the city level.
Yeah, I think that's very true, especially in the last couple of years. Trump really does suck all the oxygen out of the room when it comes to media attention and social media. But in terms of where we can really pass policies and make a concrete difference in people's lives, I think it has been and will continue to be at the state and local level. We have an incredible group of candidates running for state legislature here in Washington. We have an unprecedented number of women and women of color running across the state. And I'm optimistic that our state legislature is going to be much more representative of our communities after November 6th.
Yeah, recently we've really seen a lot of progressive movement coming from the states, from gay marriage to marijuana. It's from the states where it's coming from.
Absolutely. And I think now you're also seeing that on fighting climate change. We have an important ballot measure up this year, Initiative 1631, that would bring Washington in line with Oregon and California and British Columbia so that we have a very strong West Coast, and our entire economy is aligned here on the West Coast in terms of fighting climate change and showing the rest of the country and the rest of the world that we can fight climate change and still have a strong and prosperous economy.
So how do people get involved with Fuse?
Well, the easiest thing to do is visit our website, www.fusewashington.org. You can also follow us on Facebook at Fuse Washington or on Twitter at FuseWa. And, we are on all the different social media and email so that you can pick your favorite way to engage and follow us there.
I'll make sure I have all those links in the show notes. You folks have a fantastic organization. Is there anything that I should have asked you that maybe I missed? I know you have you do a lot of stuff.
Yes, we do have a fairly broad mission, so it's a little bit different than many other organizations that might just work on the environment or just on workers' rights or things like that. But the other part of our work that I think is very interesting to people is that we try to hold our elected officials accountable to promote leadership. While we are progressive and we support folks on the left side of the political spectrum, once they're in office, we hold Democrats and Republicans accountable alike. And if we have strong majorities in Olympia, like we are hoping for, we are going to be pushing those Democrats to act on their campaign promises and to pass the legislation that they've promised voters. For us, elections are not the end. They are just the first step toward passing legislation to improve people's lives here in Washington.
That's a very good point. Campaigns come and go, but organizations like yours are perennial.
Yes, we do a lot of electoral work, but unlike the political campaigns, we don't go away the day after the election. We're here with our staff and our volunteer base to continue pushing those elected officials to, again, pass legislation and to fulfill those campaign promises.
Well, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Thank you. I really appreciate you having me.
Talk to the Left is 100% independent. I'm just some dude in Seattle with a microphone and way too much spare time. I need your help to reach new listeners. You are probably listening to this on some kind of podcasting app. Almost all of those apps have a way to share a podcast episode on social media. If you think that this episode was important and that more people should hear it, then could you share this episode on Facebook or Twitter? Or maybe you are even listening to this episode on Facebook or Twitter. In that case, sharing this episode is even easier. In this age of algorithmically controlled ads, word of mouth is more important than ever, even if that word of mouth is digital. So please share this episode on social media. Change won't happen without action, and every action counts, no matter how small.